Question 1. System analysis indicates that a critical new power transmission line project for KEPCO is facing pressure to commence site preparation immediately to meet urgent energy demands. However, the mandatory environmental impact assessment process has not yet been fully completed and approved. A project manager is considering several approaches to address this situation. Which of the following approaches best adheres to regulatory requirements and professional ethics for a KEPCO employee? Option A. Proceed with site preparation activities that are not directly disruptive to the environment while the environmental impact assessment is being finalized. Option B. Initiate preliminary site surveys and minor clearing work, assuming these are minor enough not to require a full, formal environmental impact assessment at this stage. Option C. Prioritize the completion and approval of the environmental impact assessment before commencing any significant site preparation or construction activities. Option D. Seek an expedited but potentially less thorough review of the environmental impact assessment to allow for immediate commencement of site preparation. Correct answer is A. Proceed with site preparation activities that are not directly disruptive to the environment while the environmental impact assessment is being finalized. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a KEPCO employee due to the potential conflict between immediate operational needs and the strict adherence to regulatory compliance, specifically concerning environmental impact assessments. The need for swift project initiation must be balanced against the legal and ethical obligations to protect the environment and public interest, as mandated by relevant South Korean regulations governing energy infrastructure development. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all procedural steps are followed, even under pressure, to avoid legal repercussions and maintain KEPCO reputation. The correct approach involves prioritizing the completion of the mandatory environmental impact assessment before proceeding with any significant site preparation or construction activities. This aligns with the principles of responsible corporate conduct and regulatory adherence. Specifically, South Korean environmental laws and KEPCO internal guidelines likely stipulate that such assessments are prerequisites for project approval and commencement, ensuring that potential environmental harms are identified, mitigated, and publicly disclosed. This proactive stance demonstrates a commitment to sustainable development and legal compliance. An incorrect approach that bypasses the environmental impact assessment in favor of immediate construction risks severe regulatory penalties, including fines, project suspension, and potential legal action against KEPCO and responsible individuals. Ethically, it represents a disregard for environmental protection and public safety. Another incorrect approach, which is to proceed with preliminary site surveys without a formal assessment, is also problematic. While seemingly less intrusive, it can still constitute a violation if the surveys are part of the broader project development that requires an assessment. It may also be interpreted as an attempt to circumvent the spirit of the law, even if not a direct violation of the assessment requirement itself. This could lead to reputational damage and erode trust with stakeholders. A third incorrect approach, which is to seek an expedited but incomplete assessment, is also flawed. Regulatory processes are designed with specific timelines and requirements for thoroughness. Attempting to rush or shortcut these processes, even with good intentions, can lead to an inadequate assessment, potentially missing critical environmental risks. This undermines the purpose of the assessment and could still result in future problems and legal challenges. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve 1. Clearly identifying the regulatory requirements and internal policies applicable to the project. 2. Assessing the potential risks and consequences of noncompliance. 3. Consulting with legal and environmental compliance departments within KEPCO to understand the precise obligations and timelines. 4. Communicating the importance of regulatory adherence to all project stakeholders, including management and operational teams. 5. Advocating for the necessary time and resources to complete all required assessments thoroughly and in accordance with the law. Question 2. Market research demonstrates that a new, innovative technology for grid management has emerged from a smaller, independent firm. A KEPCO department head, aware of this development, receives an unsolicited proposal directly from the firm's CEO, who expresses a strong desire to partner with KEPCO and offers to provide a detailed demonstration of their technology. The department head believes this technology could significantly improve KEPCO operational efficiency, but the standard procurement process for new technology typically involves a lengthy competitive bidding period. The department head is considering how to proceed. Option A. Arrange a private demonstration of the technology with the CEO of the proposing firm, and then proceed with a direct contract negotiation based on the perceived benefits. Option B. Authorize the department head to conduct an informal technical review of the technology with a small internal team, and then decide whether to initiate a formal procurement process. Option C. Initiate a formal request for proposal RFP process, clearly outlining KEPCO requirements and inviting all interested and qualified vendors, including the firm that submitted the unsolicited proposal, to participate. Option D. Inform the proposing firm that KEPCO only engages through established vendor registration and competitive bidding processes, and decline any further direct engagement outside of these channels. The correct answer is C. Initiate a formal request for proposal RFP process, clearly outlining KEPCO requirements and inviting all interested and qualified vendors, including the firm that submitted the unsolicited proposal, to participate. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a KEPCO employee due to the inherent conflict between a potential business opportunity and the strict ethical and regulatory obligations governing public service and corporate conduct. The need for careful judgment arises from the potential for even the appearance of impropriety to damage KEPCO reputation and public trust, and to violate the principles of fair competition and transparency. The correct approach involves prioritizing KEPCO established procurement policies and regulatory compliance over immediate personal or departmental gain. This approach is professionally sound because it upholds the principles of fairness, transparency, and accountability mandated by relevant Korean regulations governing public procurement and corporate ethics. By adhering to the formal bidding process, KEPCO ensures that all potential suppliers are evaluated on merit, preventing favoritism and maintaining a level playing field. This aligns with the spirit and letter of laws designed to prevent corruption and ensure efficient use of public resources. An incorrect approach that involves directly engaging with the supplier outside of the formal process, even with the intention of gathering information, risks creating an appearance of bias or preferential treatment. This could violate KEPCO internal code of conduct and potentially contravene regulations that require all procurement activities to be conducted through documented and transparent channels. Such actions could be interpreted as an attempt to circumvent the established bidding procedures, undermining the integrity of the procurement process and potentially leading to legal challenges or reputational damage. Another incorrect approach, that of dismissing the opportunity without proper consideration, fails to explore potential benefits for KEPCO. While adherence to process is paramount, a complete disregard for a potentially valuable supplier or technology without a thorough, documented rationale could be seen as a failure of due diligence and strategic thinking, potentially missing out on cost savings, technological advancements that could benefit KEPCO and its stakeholders. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of KEPCO internal policies, relevant national procurement laws, and ethical guidelines. When faced with an unsolicited offer or a potential opportunity, the professional should 1. Document the unsolicited contact. 2. Consult KEPCO procurement department and legal counsel to understand the appropriate procedures for evaluating such opportunities. 3. Ensure all interactions and evaluations are conducted transparently and in accordance with established protocols, prioritizing fairness and compliance above all else. Question 3. Market research demonstrates that a potential strategic partner for KEPCO is experiencing internal financial difficulties, which could lead to a significant shift in their market position. A KEPCO business development manager, who has a close personal relationship with a senior executive at the potential partner company, learns about these difficulties through informal conversations. The business development manager believes this information could be valuable for KEPCO's strategic planning and negotiation leverage. What is the most appropriate course of action for the KEPCO business development manager in this situation, considering the need to uphold KEPCO integrity and comply with relevant regulatory frameworks? Option A. Immediately use the information to adjust KEPCO negotiation strategy and prepare for a more aggressive stance in discussions with the potential partner. Option B. Assume the information is informal and not material, and continue with the planned business development activities as if no such information was received. Option C. Discreetly share the information with KEPCO senior management team to inform strategic decisions without directly involving the potential partner's executive. Option D. Consult KEPCO internal compliance department and legal counsel to understand the regulatory implications and seek guidance on how to proceed ethically and legally. The correct answer is A. Immediately use the information to adjust KEPCO negotiation strategy and prepare for a more aggressive stance in discussions with the potential partner. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a KEPCO employee due to the inherent conflict between pursuing business opportunities and adhering to strict regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. The need for careful judgment arises from the potential for even perceived impropriety to damage KEPCO reputation and lead to regulatory penalties. The core of the challenge lies in navigating the gray areas of information sharing and potential conflicts of interest while upholding the integrity of KEPCO operations and its commitment to fair competition. The correct approach involves proactively seeking clarification from KEPCO internal compliance department and legal counsel. This demonstrates a commitment to upholding regulatory frameworks and ethical standards by ensuring all actions are aligned with established guidelines. Specifically, it acknowledges the importance of transparency and due diligence in business dealings, preventing any actions that could be misconstrued as insider trading or unfair advantage. This approach prioritizes adherence to the KEPCO hiring assessment test's implied regulatory environment, which would likely emphasize integrity, compliance, and responsible business practices. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the information sharing without seeking guidance. This fails to acknowledge the potential regulatory and ethical implications, creating a significant risk of violating compliance policies. It suggests a disregard for established procedures and a lack of understanding of the importance of maintaining a level playing field in business interactions. Such an action could be interpreted as an attempt to gain an unfair advantage, potentially leading to investigations and sanctions. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the information as irrelevant without proper consideration. This overlooks the potential for even seemingly innocuous information to be material or to create a perception of impropriety. A responsible professional would recognize that any information obtained through business interactions, especially concerning potential competitors or market shifts, warrants careful evaluation against compliance policies. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear framework. 1. Identify the potential ethical or regulatory concern. 2. Consult relevant internal policies and guidelines. 3. Seek advice from the appropriate internal departments, e.g., compliance, legal. 4. Document all consultations and decisions. 5. Act only after receiving clear guidance and ensuring full compliance. Question 4. Market research demonstrates that a new competitor is entering the South Korean electricity market, potentially impacting KEPCO market share. KEPCO strategy team is tasked with developing a response to maintain its competitive position. The team is considering several approaches to counter the new entrant. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the regulatory framework and ethical guidelines governing KEPCO operations in the South Korean energy sector? Option A. Launch a public relations campaign that highlights the new competitor's perceived financial instability and potential service disruptions, using selectively chosen data to create doubt among potential customers. Option B. Discreetly share KEPCO internal projections on future energy demand and pricing trends with key industry partners to subtly influence the new competitor's initial market entry strategy. Option C. Lobby for immediate regulatory changes that impose significant new licensing requirements specifically designed to create substantial barriers for new entrants like the competitor. Option D. Develop and promote KEPCO unique value propositions, such as advanced grid technology and superior customer service, while also exploring internal efficiencies to offer competitive pricing. The correct answer is D. Develop and promote KEPCO unique value propositions, such as advanced grid technology and superior customer service, while also exploring internal efficiencies to offer competitive pricing. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing KEPCO's strategic objectives with the ethical and regulatory obligations concerning fair competition and market integrity. The pressure to gain a competitive edge must not override adherence to established rules designed to prevent market manipulation and ensure a level playing field for all participants. Careful judgment is required to identify and implement strategies that are both effective and compliant. The correct approach involves leveraging KEPCO internal expertise and publicly available information to develop innovative service offerings and operational efficiencies. This strategy is ethically sound and legally compliant, as it focuses on organic growth and competitive advantage through legitimate means. It aligns with the principles of fair competition, which are fundamental to regulated markets and are typically reinforced by specific provisions within the KEPCO hiring assessment tests governing regulatory framework, emphasizing innovation and customer value creation without resorting to unfair practices. An incorrect approach that involves disseminating non-public, market-sensitive information to influence competitor pricing would be a severe regulatory and ethical failure. This action could be construed as market manipulation or insider trading, depending on the specific nature of the information and its intended use, directly violating principles of fair market conduct and potentially leading to significant legal penalties and reputational damage for KEPCO. Another incorrect approach, such as engaging in aggressive, misleading advertising campaigns that disparage competitors without factual basis, would also constitute an ethical breach and potentially violate consumer protection laws. Such tactics undermine trust and create an unfair market environment, failing to uphold the integrity expected of a leading energy provider. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of the relevant regulatory framework governing KEPCO operations and market interactions. Before implementing any strategy, professionals should conduct a compliance review, assessing potential risks against regulatory requirements and ethical standards. Seeking guidance from legal and compliance departments is crucial when there is any ambiguity. The focus should always be on achieving business objectives through transparent, fair, and lawful means, prioritizing long-term sustainability and stakeholder trust over short-term gains achieved through questionable practices. Question 5. The efficiency study reveals that certain operational procedures within KEPCO Power Generation Division could be streamlined to significantly reduce energy waste and improve output. However, some of these proposed streamlining measures appear to deviate from established safety protocols and environmental reporting guidelines as outlined in South Korean energy sector regulations. What is the most appropriate course of action for the KEPCO management team? Option A. Conduct a thorough review of the efficiency study's recommendations against all applicable KEPCO policies and South Korean energy sector regulations, consulting with legal and compliance departments to assess and mitigate any potential risks before implementation. Option B. Postpone any implementation of the efficiency study's findings until a complete overhaul of the existing safety and environmental regulations can be completed. Option C. Implement only those efficiency recommendations that clearly do not conflict with any existing regulations, even if these represent a smaller portion of the potential efficiency gains. Option D. Immediately implement the efficiency recommendations that offer the greatest cost savings, assuming that minor deviations from protocols will be addressed later. Correct answer is D. Immediately implement the efficiency recommendations that offer the greatest cost savings, assuming that minor deviations from protocols will be addressed later. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the pursuit of operational efficiency with strict adherence to regulatory compliance and ethical conduct, specifically within the context of KEPCO operational framework. The pressure to improve performance, as highlighted by the efficiency study, can create a temptation to overlook or downplay potential regulatory risks. Therefore, careful judgment is required to ensure that any proposed solutions are not only effective, but also fully compliant with all applicable laws and KEPCO internal guidelines. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the efficiency study's findings in conjunction with a comprehensive assessment of relevant KEPCO policies and South Korean energy sector regulations. This approach is professionally sound because it prioritizes a risk-based methodology. By first identifying potential areas of non-compliance or ethical concern arising from the efficiency recommendations, and then seeking expert consultation, legal, compliance, or relevant technical departments, KEPCO can proactively mitigate risks. This aligns with the principle of responsible corporate governance, ensuring that operational improvements do not inadvertently lead to legal liabilities or reputational damage. It demonstrates a commitment to both performance and integrity, which are paramount in a regulated industry. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on implementing the efficiency recommendations without a prior regulatory and policy review fails to acknowledge the critical importance of compliance. This could lead to violations of South Korean energy laws or KEPCO internal operational standards, resulting in penalties, fines, or operational disruptions. Another incorrect approach, which involves delaying the implementation of potentially beneficial efficiency measures due to an overly cautious interpretation of regulations without seeking clarification, can hinder progress and negatively impact KEPCO competitiveness. This demonstrates a lack of proactive problem solving and an inability to navigate regulatory landscapes effectively. A third incorrect approach, which involves selectively implementing recommendations that appear compliant while ignoring those with potential regulatory ambiguities, is ethically unsound and creates a patchwork of compliance that is difficult to manage and prone to future issues. Professionals in such situations should employ a structured decision-making process. This involves 1. Understanding the core objective efficiency improvement. 2. Identifying potential risks and constraints regulatory, ethical, operational. 3. Gathering relevant information, study findings, regulations, policies. 4. Consulting with subject matter experts, legal, compliance, technical. 5. Evaluating alternative solutions based on their effectiveness, feasibility, and compliance. 6. Documenting the decision-making process and rationale. 7. Implementing the chosen solution with ongoing monitoring for compliance and effectiveness. Question 6. Operational review demonstrates an unusual pattern of data access requests originating from an external IP address targeting a critical KEPCO database. The requests appear to be automated and are increasing in frequency. You are the first to notice this anomaly during your routine system monitoring. Option A. Immediately attempt to block the IP address and investigate the nature of the data request yourself to understand the scope of the issue before reporting. Option B. Document the anomaly thoroughly, including timestamps, IP address, and the nature of the requests, and immediately escalate it to the KEPCO IT security department and follow their incident response procedures. Option C. Continue monitoring the situation for a few more hours to see if the pattern changes or stops on its own before taking any action. Option D. Inform your direct supervisor and a few trusted colleagues in other departments about the suspicious activity to gather their opinions on how to proceed. The correct answer is A. Immediately attempt to block the IP address and investigate the nature of the data. Request yourself to understand the scope of the issue before reporting. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing operational efficiency with strict adherence to KEPCO internal policies and potentially relevant South Korean regulations concerning data handling and cybersecurity. The pressure to quickly resolve an issue while maintaining data integrity and security necessitates careful judgment. The correct approach involves immediately escalating the identified anomaly to the designated IT security team and following KEPCO-established incident response protocol. This is the right professional practice because it ensures that a potential security breach or data integrity issue is handled by trained personnel with the appropriate tools and authority. It aligns with the principle of timely reporting and containment, which is crucial for mitigating damage and complying with any applicable data protection laws or cybersecurity standards that KEPCO is obligated to follow. This proactive and procedural response minimizes risk and upholds KEPCO commitment to security and compliance. An incorrect approach would be to attempt to resolve the anomaly independently without proper authorization or expertise. This could lead to further data corruption, a missed security vulnerability, or a violation of KEPCO internal data handling policies, potentially exposing the company to regulatory penalties or reputational damage. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the anomaly, hoping it resolves itself. This demonstrates a failure to exercise due diligence and a disregard for potential risks, which is professionally unacceptable and could have severe consequences for KEPCO operational integrity and security posture. Finally, sharing the anomaly details with colleagues outside the immediate IT security team before proper assessment could lead to misinformation or unauthorized access attempts, further compromising the situation. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established protocols and escalation procedures, when encountering potential operational or security issues. This involves recognizing the limits of one's own expertise, understanding the importance of timely and accurate reporting, and prioritizing the protection of company assets and data integrity above immediate, unverified solutions. Question 7. Upon reviewing a draft of KEPCO upcoming strategic partnership announcement, a colleague casually mentions that this partnership is likely to significantly impact the stock price of a publicly traded competitor. You are considering making a personal investment in that competitor's stock. Which of the following actions best aligns with KEPCO hiring assessment test expectations regarding ethical conduct and regulatory compliance? Option A. Proceed with the investment after the announcement is made public, ensuring you do not act on the information before it is officially disclosed. Option B. Decline to make any investment and disregard the information, as it is based on informal conversation and not official confirmation. Option C. Seek clarification from your colleague about the source and certainty of their information before deciding on any investment. Option D. Make the investment immediately, as the colleague's information is likely accurate and represents a valuable opportunity. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the investment after the announcement is made public, ensuring you do not act on the information before it is officially disclosed. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure adherence to KEPCO internal policies and relevant regulatory frameworks governing corporate conduct and information handling. The core of the challenge lies in maintaining objectivity and preventing the misuse of sensitive, non-public information. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between legitimate business discussions and the inappropriate disclosure of proprietary data. The correct approach involves prioritizing KEPCO-established internal policies and regulatory compliance over personal relationships or perceived informal agreements. This approach demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and legal obligations by seeking official channels for information verification and by respecting the confidentiality of KEPCO strategic plans. This aligns with the principles of corporate governance and the duty of care owed to the company and its stakeholders, ensuring that decisions are made based on verified facts and in accordance with established procedures, thereby mitigating risks of insider trading or competitive disadvantage. An incorrect approach that involves proceeding with the investment based on the informal assurance from a colleague fails to acknowledge the potential for misinformation and the serious regulatory implications of acting on non-public information. This bypasses necessary due diligence and could lead to violations of securities laws or internal KEPCO policies designed to prevent market manipulation and insider trading. Another incorrect approach, which is to dismiss the information as irrelevant without further investigation, is also professionally unsound. While it avoids direct violation, it misses an opportunity to identify potential risks or confirm the accuracy of information that could impact KEPCO market position or regulatory standing. Responsible professionals are expected to exercise a degree of vigilance regarding information that might affect their company. A third incorrect approach, which is to immediately report the colleague for a potential breach without first attempting to clarify the situation through appropriate internal channels, could be seen as overly punitive and potentially damaging to professional relationships without fully understanding the context. While reporting is important, the initial step should be to gather facts and follow established internal reporting protocols. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a clear understanding of KEPCO code of conduct and relevant regulatory guidelines. When faced with potentially sensitive information, the framework should be: 1. Assess the nature of the information. Is it non-public and material? 2. Identify potential conflicts of interest or policy violations. 3. Consult KEPCO internal policies and compliance department for guidance. 4. Seek official verification through appropriate channels rather than relying on informal assurances. 5. Act with integrity and prioritize regulatory compliance and the company's best interests. Question 8. Strategic planning requires KEPCO to identify new opportunities for renewable energy integration. Given the company's commitment to sustainable growth and adherence to South Korean energy sector regulations, which of the following approaches best balances these objectives while mitigating potential risks? Option A. Focus on rapidly acquiring existing renewable energy assets to quickly increase KEPCO market share in the renewable sector, assuming that post-acquisition integration will address any regulatory compliance issues. Option B. Allocate a significant portion of the strategic planning budget to lobbying efforts aimed at influencing future regulatory changes that would favor KEPCO renewable energy expansion plans. Option C. Prioritize the development of innovative, cost-effective renewable energy technologies without extensive prior consultation with regulatory bodies, believing that the inherent benefits of clean energy will lead to regulatory approval. Option D. Proactively engage with the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy (MODI) and the Korea Electric Power Corporation (KEPCO) Regulatory Affairs Department to identify all applicable environmental, safety, and market regulations for proposed renewable energy projects, and develop strategic plans that demonstrably meet or exceed these requirements. The correct answer is D. Proactively engage with the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy (MODI) and the Korea Electric Power Corporation (KEPCO) Regulatory Affairs Department to identify all applicable environmental, safety, and market regulations for proposed renewable energy projects, and develop strategic plans that demonstrably meet or exceed these requirements. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a KEPCO employee involved in strategic planning due to the inherent tension between achieving ambitious growth targets and adhering to the strict regulatory framework governing the energy sector in South Korea. The need to balance economic objectives with environmental sustainability and public safety mandates a cautious and compliant approach. Misinterpreting or circumventing these regulations could lead to significant legal penalties, reputational damage for KEPCO, and potential harm to the environment and public. The correct approach involves prioritizing a thorough understanding and strict adherence to all relevant South Korean energy regulations, including those pertaining to environmental impact assessments, safety standards, and fair competition, as mandated by the Electricity Business Act and related decrees. This approach ensures that KEPCO strategic plans are not only economically viable, but also legally sound and ethically responsible, safeguarding the company's long-term interests and its commitment to public service. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on aggressive market share expansion without adequate consideration for regulatory compliance risks, violating the Electricity Business Act, which outlines operational requirements and market conduct rules. This could result in fines, license revocation, or other sanctions. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes short-term cost savings by cutting corners on environmental protection measures would contravene the Environmental Impact Assessment Act and potentially lead to severe environmental damage and legal repercussions. Furthermore, an approach that neglects to consult with relevant government bodies or stakeholders regarding potential regulatory impacts before finalizing strategic plans could be seen as a failure in due diligence and stakeholder engagement, undermining transparency and potentially leading to unforeseen regulatory hurdles. Professionals in such situations should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all applicable regulations. This is followed by a comprehensive risk assessment, evaluating the potential legal, financial, and reputational consequences of each strategic option against these regulations. Consultation with legal and compliance departments, as well as relevant government agencies, is crucial to ensure all aspects are thoroughly understood. Finally, the chosen strategy must demonstrably align with both KEPCO business objectives and the overarching regulatory and ethical obligations. Question 9. Market research demonstrates a significant upward trend in the demand for a specific type of advanced battery technology that KEPCO utilizes in its operations. A preliminary report suggests that this trend is driven by a recent, unannounced technological breakthrough by a key supplier. A KEPCO procurement officer is tasked with evaluating this information to inform future purchasing strategies. What is the most appropriate course of action for the KEPCO procurement officer in this situation? Option A. Share the preliminary market research findings with external suppliers to gauge their immediate reaction and potential capacity to meet the projected demand. Option B. Conduct a thorough internal review of KEPCO policies on information handling and compliance, and consult with the legal and compliance departments to assess the nature of the market research and its implications before making any procurement decisions. Option C. Immediately initiate a large-scale procurement of the advanced battery technology to secure supply before prices potentially rise, based on the market research. Option D. Disregard the market research as speculative and continue with existing procurement plans without further investigation. The correct answer is C. Immediately initiate a large-scale procurement of the advanced battery technology to secure supply before prices potentially rise, based on the market research. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge for a KEPCO employee due to the inherent conflict between a potential business opportunity and the strict ethical and regulatory obligations governing insider information. The employee must navigate the delicate balance of leveraging market insights for strategic advantage while rigorously adhering to regulations designed to prevent market manipulation and ensure fair competition. The core of the challenge lies in discerning what constitutes legitimate, publicly available market research versus information that is non-public and potentially material, which, if acted upon, could lead to insider trading violations. Careful judgment is required to avoid even the appearance of impropriety. The correct approach involves a thorough review of KEPCO internal policies on information handling and compliance, alongside a careful assessment of the nature of the market research. This approach is professionally sound because it prioritizes adherence to the regulatory framework and ethical guidelines established for KEPCO employees. Specifically, it ensures that any action taken is based on information that is either publicly disseminated or has been properly disclosed and analyzed within the company's established procedures, thereby preventing any potential breach of insider trading laws or company codes of conduct. This proactive stance safeguards both the individual employee and KEPCO from legal repercussions and reputational damage. An incorrect approach of immediately initiating a large-scale procurement based solely on the preliminary market research is professionally unacceptable. This fails to account for the possibility that the research might contain or be derived from non-public material information. Acting on such information would constitute a direct violation of insider trading regulations, which prohibit trading securities based on material non-public information. Another incorrect approach, that of sharing the preliminary research findings with external suppliers before a formal internal assessment, also presents significant ethical and regulatory risks. This could be construed as tipping off external parties, potentially enabling them to gain an unfair advantage or engage in market manipulation, thereby violating confidentiality and fair market practices. A third incorrect approach, dismissing the research entirely without further investigation, is also professionally deficient as it misses a potentially valuable strategic insight and fails to demonstrate due diligence in exploring market opportunities, even if the initial findings require careful vetting. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential conflicts of interest or regulatory implications. This is followed by consulting relevant internal policies and external regulations. The next step involves gathering all necessary information and conducting a comprehensive assessment, seeking expert advice if needed. Finally, decisions should be made and actions taken in strict alignment with established legal and ethical standards, with a clear audit trail to demonstrate compliance. Question 10. Examination of the data shows that during the preliminary environmental impact assessment for a new KEPCO power transmission line project, several data points regarding potential soil contamination levels at proposed construction site fall slightly outside the acceptable thresholds defined by South Korean environmental protection laws. The project deadline for submitting the full environmental impact report is rapidly approaching. What is the most appropriate course of action for the KEPCO environmental assessment team? Option A. Proceed with the submission of the report, but adjust the data points to fall within the acceptable thresholds, citing minor calibration errors in the initial measurement equipment. Option B. Halt the submission process and conduct an extensive, time-consuming investigation to fully understand and rectify every minor anomaly before submitting the report, even if it means missing the deadline. Option C. Pause the submission process. Thoroughly investigate the anomalous data points to determine their cause and significance, and consult with KEPCO legal and environmental compliance departments to determine the best course of action for accurate and compliant reporting, potentially requesting an extension if necessary. Option D. Immediately submit the report with the anomalous data, noting the slight deviations in an appendix, and initiate further investigation post-submission. The correct answer is D. Immediately submit the report with the anomalous data, noting the slight deviations in an appendix, and initiate further investigation post-submission. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing KEPCO operational needs with the stringent regulatory framework governing its operations, specifically concerning the handling of sensitive environmental impact data. The pressure to meet project deadlines can create a temptation to bypass established protocols, but adherence to regulations is paramount to avoid legal repercussions, reputational damage, and potential harm to the environment. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all data handling and reporting processes are compliant and transparent. The correct approach involves meticulously following KEPCO internal data management policies, which are designed to align with the relevant South Korean environmental regulations. This approach prioritizes data integrity, accuracy, and timely, compliant reporting. Specifically, it necessitates a thorough review of the collected data against established environmental standards, ensuring all discrepancies are investigated and resolved before submission. This aligns with the principles of environmental stewardship and regulatory compliance mandated by South Korean law, which requires accurate reporting of environmental impacts for infrastructure projects. An incorrect approach that involves immediately submitting the data without addressing the identified discrepancies fails to uphold regulatory requirements. This could lead to inaccurate environmental impact assessments, potentially resulting in non-compliance with environmental protection laws and subsequent penalties. Another incorrect approach, which is to delay the submission indefinitely until all minor anomalies are perfectly resolved, while seemingly cautious, can also be problematic. This could violate reporting deadlines stipulated by regulations, leading to penalties for late submission, and potentially hindering the timely implementation of necessary environmental mitigation measures. Furthermore, attempting to selectively omit or downplay the anomalous data to present a more favorable picture would constitute a severe ethical and regulatory breach, undermining the integrity of the assessment and potentially leading to significant legal consequences and public distrust. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the relevant regulatory obligations and KEPCO internal policies. When faced with data anomalies, the process should involve 1. Identifying the nature and potential impact of the anomaly. 2. Consulting relevant technical experts and supervisors. 3. Investigating the root cause of the anomaly. 4. Implementing corrective actions to ensure data accuracy and integrity. And 5. Documenting all steps taken. If the anomaly cannot be immediately resolved within the project timeline, the professional should escalate the issue to senior management and legal/compliance departments to determine the most appropriate course of action that remains compliant with all regulations and minimizes risk. Question 11. Assessment of how a KEPCO procurement officer should ethically and legally respond when they discover that a close personal friend is a key stakeholder in a company submitting a bid for a significant KEPCO contract, and the officer is involved in the evaluation process. Option A. Resign from KEPCO to avoid any appearance of impropriety. Option B. Proceed with the evaluation, ensuring the friend's company is treated fairly but without any special consideration. Option C. Discreetly inform the friend about the evaluation process and any potential challenges to their bid. Option D. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to KEPCO compliance department and recuse themselves from all aspects of the bid evaluation. The correct answer is D. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to KEPCO compliance department and recuse themselves from all aspects of the bid evaluation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a KEPCO employee due to the inherent conflict between a personal relationship and the company's ethical obligations regarding procurement. Maintaining the integrity of KEPCO supply chain and ensuring fair competition are paramount. The employee must navigate this situation with utmost discretion and adherence to KEPCO internal policies and relevant South Korean regulations governing corporate conduct and fair trade. The core difficulty lies in balancing personal loyalty with professional responsibility and avoiding any perception or reality of favoritism that could compromise KEPCO interests or violate legal standards. The correct approach involves immediate and transparent disclosure of the personal relationship to the appropriate KEPCO authority, such as the compliance department or a designated ethics officer. This action demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and allows KEPCO to implement necessary safeguards, such as recusal from any decision-making processes involving the supplier. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance in South Korean legal frameworks that emphasize transparency and the prevention of conflicts of interest, such as those outlined in the Act on the Prevention of Corruption and the establishment of the Anti-Corruption and Civil Rights Commission and KEPCO's own Code of Conduct. An incorrect approach would be to remain silent and proceed with the procurement process as usual. This failure to disclose creates a direct conflict of interest and violates the trust placed in the employee by KEPCO and its stakeholders. It exposes KEPCO to potential legal repercussions under fair trade laws for engaging in unfair procurement practices and could lead to reputational damage. Another incorrect approach would be to subtly influence the procurement process in favor of the acquaintance's company, even without explicit instruction. This constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty and potentially illegal favoritism, undermining the principles of fair competition and potentially violating anti-corruption statutes. A third incorrect approach would be to resign from KEPCO to avoid the conflict. While this might seem like a way to sidestep the issue, it fails to address the ethical obligation to report the conflict and allows a potential issue to persist within KEPCO procurement system without proper internal resolution. Professionals in similar situations should adopt a proactive and transparent decision-making process. This involves recognizing potential conflicts of interest, understanding the relevant company policies and legal obligations, and seeking guidance from designated internal resources, e.g., compliance, legal, HR, before taking any action. Prioritizing ethical conduct and the company's best interests over personal relationships is crucial for maintaining professional integrity and safeguarding the organization. Question 12. Which approach would be most appropriate for a KEPCO project manager who learns that a close personal friend is a senior executive at a company that is a potential supplier for a significant upcoming KEPCO project, and this friend has indicated a desire to discuss potential collaboration? Option A. Immediately report the personal relationship and the expressed interest in collaboration to KEPCO Compliance Department and seek guidance on managing the potential conflict of interest before any further engagement. Option B. Proceed with an informal meeting with the friend to understand the supplier's capabilities, assuring the friend that professional integrity will be maintained throughout the procurement process. Option C. Discreetly inform colleagues involved in the project about the personal connection, suggesting they be particularly diligent in their evaluations of the potential supplier's offerings. Option D. Avoid any discussion or interaction with the friend and the potential supplier, hoping the situation resolves itself without direct involvement. The correct answer is A. Immediately report the personal relationship and the expressed interest in collaboration to KEPCO Compliance Department, and seek guidance on managing the potential conflict of interest before any further engagement. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a KEPCO employee due to the inherent conflict between a potential business opportunity and the strict ethical guidelines governing public service and corporate conduct. The need to balance KEPCO interests with the imperative to avoid any appearance or reality of impropriety is paramount. Careful judgment is required to navigate the delicate line between legitimate business engagement and unethical influence peddling. The correct approach involves a transparent and formal process that prioritizes ethical conduct and adherence to KEPCO internal policies and relevant South Korean regulations concerning public officials and corporate ethics. This approach ensures that any engagement with the potential supplier is conducted at arm's length, with clear documentation and oversight, thereby safeguarding KEPCO reputation and preventing any undue influence or preferential treatment. Specifically, South Korean law and KEPCO internal code of conduct would mandate reporting such a potential conflict of interest to the appropriate internal compliance department or ethics committee. This allows for an objective assessment of the situation and the establishment of clear protocols for any future interactions, such as recusal from decision-making processes or the formation of an independent evaluation committee. The emphasis is on proactive disclosure and adherence to established procedures to maintain integrity. An incorrect approach that involves directly engaging with the potential supplier to explore the opportunity without prior disclosure or adherence to KEPCO established procurement and ethics policies would be professionally unacceptable. This failure to report a potential conflict of interest violates the principles of transparency and fairness expected of KEPCO employees. It creates an environment where favoritism could be perceived or actualized, undermining the competitive bidding process and potentially leading to the selection of a less suitable supplier. Such an action could also contravene South Korean anti-corruption laws and KEPCO's own code of conduct, exposing the employee and the company to significant reputational and legal risks. Another incorrect approach, such as subtly influencing colleagues to favor the supplier without explicit disclosure, represents a more insidious form of ethical breach. This circumvents formal reporting mechanisms and creates an environment of covert bias. It directly violates the duty of loyalty and integrity owed to KEPCO and its stakeholders, as it prioritizes personal or informal relationships over objective evaluation criteria. This behavior erodes trust within the organization and can lead to decisions that are not in KEPCO's best interest. A third incorrect approach, which is to ignore the situation entirely and hope it resolves itself, is also professionally unsound. This passive stance fails to address the potential ethical dilemma proactively. It leaves KEPCO vulnerable to accusations of negligence or complicity if impropriety were to occur. Ethical decision-making requires active engagement with potential conflicts, not avoidance. Professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear framework. 1. Identify the potential conflict of interest. 2. Consult KEPCO internal policies and relevant South Korean regulations. 3. Report the conflict to the designated authority, e.g., Compliance Department Ethics Committee. 4. Seek guidance on appropriate steps to manage or mitigate the conflict, which may include recusal or independent oversight. 5. Document all actions taken. Question 13. Implementation of a new energy infrastructure project for KEPCO hinges on securing a critical component supply contract with a new vendor. During the final review of the vendor's proposal, it is discovered that a mandatory environmental impact assessment certificate, explicitly required by KEPCO procurement policy and South Korean environmental regulations, is missing from the submitted documentation. The vendor's representative assures KEPCO that the certificate is being processed and will be available shortly, emphasizing the project's tight deadline and the potential for significant delays if the contract is not awarded immediately. What is the most appropriate course of action for the KEPCO procurement officer? Option A. Immediately award the contract to the vendor, assuming the certificate will be provided and that the project timeline is paramount. Option B. Proceed with awarding the contract, obtaining a written commitment from the vendor to submit the missing certificate within a specified short time frame, and inform the relevant internal departments of the situation. Option C. Award the contract to the vendor based on their verbal assurance, prioritizing the project timeline over the missing documentation. Option D. Reject the vendor's proposal due to the incomplete documentation, and inform the vendor that they may resubmit once all required documents, including the Environmental Impact Assessment Certificate, are fully obtained and verified. The correct answer is B. Proceed with awarding the contract, obtaining a written commitment from the vendor to submit the missing certificate within a specified short time frame, and inform the relevant internal departments of the situation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a KEPCO employee due to the inherent conflict between a business opportunity and the strict adherence to regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. The pressure to secure a new contract, especially one involving a significant potential client, can create an environment where shortcuts or overlooking minor discrepancies might seem appealing. However, the regulatory framework governing KEPCO operations, particularly concerning procurement and contract management, demands absolute integrity and transparency. The correct approach involves meticulously verifying all documentation and ensuring full compliance with KEPCO internal policies and relevant South Korean regulations for public procurement and corporate governance. This demonstrates a commitment to ethical business practices, upholds the integrity of KEPCO procurement process, and mitigates legal and reputational risks. Specifically, South Korean laws such as the Act on Contracts, to which a contracting authority is a party, and the Enforcement Decree of the Act on Contracts, to which a contracting authority is a party, along with KEPCO's own internal procurement guidelines, mandate thorough due diligence and adherence to established procedures. This approach prioritizes long-term trust and sustainability over short-term gains. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the contract based on an assumption that the missing documentation is a minor oversight and will be rectified later. This fails to acknowledge the legal and regulatory requirements for contract finalization, which often stipulate that all necessary approvals and documentation must be in place before a contract is binding. Such an action could lead to contract invalidation, penalties, and damage to KEPCO reputation for due diligence. Another incorrect approach would be to bypass the standard verification process due to the urgency of the situation or the influence of the potential client. This directly violates principles of fair competition and transparency, potentially exposing KEPCO to accusations of favoritism or corruption, and contravening the spirit and letter of procurement regulations designed to prevent such issues. A third incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the verbal assurance of the potential client regarding the missing documentation without independent verification. This demonstrates a lack of professional skepticism and a failure to adhere to the principle of trust but verify, which is crucial in all business dealings, especially those involving significant financial commitments and regulatory oversight. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established policies and regulations. This involves a clear understanding of the relevant legal and ethical landscape, a commitment to thorough due diligence, and the courage to escalate concerns or seek clarification when faced with ambiguity or potential noncompliance, even under pressure. The process should involve seeking guidance from legal or compliance departments, when in doubt, and ensuring that all actions are defensible under scrutiny. Question 14. The audit findings indicate a potential misstatement in KEPCO revenue recognition for a significant long-term project. The audit team has flagged that the current accounting treatment may not fully align with the applicable accounting standards for recognizing revenue over time. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the KEPCO Finance Department? Option A. Conduct a detailed review of the project's contractual terms and performance obligations, comparing them against the specific criteria for revenue recognition over time as stipulated by the relevant accounting standards, and consult with KEPCO internal audit and external auditors to validate the findings and proposed adjustments. Option B. Initiate a discussion with the project management team to explore ways to modify the project's reporting metrics to better align with the current revenue recognition treatment, thereby validating the existing approach. Option C. Inform the audit team that the current revenue recognition method has been KEPCO standard practice for similar projects and is therefore acceptable, without undertaking a detailed review of the specific project's compliance. Option D. Immediately adjust the revenue recognition for the project to reflect a more conservative approach, assuming the audit findings suggest a potential overstatement, without further detailed analysis. The correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed review of the project's contractual terms and performance obligations, comparing them against the specific criteria for revenue recognition over time as stipulated by the relevant accounting standards, and consult with KEPCO internal audit and external auditors to validate the findings and proposed adjustments. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge involving potential conflicts of interest and the ethical obligation to maintain the integrity of financial reporting within KEPCO. The audit findings suggest a deviation from established accounting principles, potentially impacting the accuracy of KEPCO financial statements. Navigating this requires careful judgment to ensure compliance with relevant regulations and ethical standards, balancing the need for accurate reporting with potential pressures. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the identified discrepancies against the relevant accounting standards and KEPCO internal policies. This process should involve consultation with KEPCO internal audit department and, if necessary, external auditors to ensure an objective assessment. The justification lies in the fundamental principle of financial reporting accuracy and transparency, mandated by regulatory frameworks governing publicly listed companies. Adhering to these standards prevents misrepresentation and upholds investor confidence. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately implementing the suggested accounting treatment without further investigation. This fails to acknowledge the potential for error in the initial assessment and bypasses the necessary due diligence required by accounting standards. It risks perpetuating an incorrect accounting practice, leading to materially misstated financial statements and potential regulatory sanctions. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the audit findings without a proper review, attributing them to minor oversights. This demonstrates a disregard for the audit process and the importance of internal controls. It neglects the responsibility to investigate potential issues that could impact financial reporting integrity, violating ethical duties, and potentially breaching regulatory requirements for accurate disclosure. A third incorrect approach is to seek to influence the audit opinion to overlook the findings. This constitutes a serious ethical breach and potentially illegal activity, undermining the independence of the audit function and the integrity of financial reporting. Such actions would expose KEPCO and the individuals involved to severe legal and reputational consequences. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should adopt a systematic approach. First, understand the nature and scope of the audit findings. Second, consult the relevant regulatory framework and accounting standards to determine the correct treatment. Third, engage in open and transparent communication with internal and external stakeholders, including the audit team and senior management. Fourth, document all decisions and justifications thoroughly. This structured approach ensures that decisions are based on objective evidence and regulatory compliance, safeguarding both the company's financial integrity and individual professional ethics. Question 15. During the evaluation of a potential vendor for services related to the KEPCO hiring assessment test, a vendor representative offers to provide detailed internal operational data and insights into their proprietary assessment methodologies, stating it will help KEPCO better understand their capabilities. The hiring manager is tasked with assessing the vendor's suitability. Which of the following approaches best aligns with ethical conduct and regulatory compliance for KEPCO? Option A. Inform the vendor that KEPCO is not interested in their services and proceed with evaluating other vendors without further engagement. Option B. Accept the detailed internal operational data and proprietary insights, as this information will provide a comprehensive understanding of the vendor's strengths and weaknesses, thereby ensuring the best selection for KEPCO. Option C. Request the vendor to share specific examples of past client successes that are publicly verifiable, while clearly stating that proprietary operational data is not required for the assessment. Option D. Politely decline the offer of proprietary data, explaining that the assessment will focus on publicly available information and documented service delivery capabilities, and request a standard proposal outlining their services and how they meet KEPCO stated requirements for the hiring assessment. The correct answer is D. Politely decline the offer of proprietary data, explaining that the assessment will focus on publicly available information and documented service delivery capabilities, and request a standard proposal outlining their services and how they meet KEPCO stated requirements for the hiring assessment. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure that KEPCO operations adhere to the highest ethical standards and regulatory compliance, specifically within the context of the KEPCO hiring assessment test's jurisdiction. The core challenge lies in balancing the need for efficient information gathering with the imperative to avoid any perception or reality of impropriety that could compromise KEPCO integrity or violate relevant regulations. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between legitimate information seeking and actions that could be construed as undue influence or a breach of confidentiality. The correct approach involves a proactive and transparent communication strategy. This entails clearly articulating the purpose of the information request, emphasizing that it is for legitimate assessment purposes related to the hiring process, and ensuring that all information shared is done so in accordance with KEPCO internal policies and any applicable regulatory guidelines for data handling and privacy. This approach upholds professional integrity by demonstrating a commitment to fairness, transparency, and compliance, thereby safeguarding KEPCO reputation and ensuring a robust and ethical hiring process. An incorrect approach that involves directly requesting proprietary or sensitive information from a potential vendor without a clear, documented business justification tied to the hiring assessment would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This could be interpreted as an attempt to gain an unfair advantage or to solicit information that is not relevant to the assessment, potentially violating principles of fair competition and data privacy. Another incorrect approach, such as accepting unsolicited, detailed internal operational data from a vendor that goes beyond what is necessary for the assessment, risks creating a perception of favoritism or a conflict of interest. This could also lead to the misuse of confidential information, violating trust and potentially breaching contractual obligations with the vendor. A third incorrect approach, which is to ignore the request for information and proceed without addressing the vendor's concerns, demonstrates a lack of professionalism and could lead to disputes or legal challenges, undermining KEPCO commitment to ethical business practices. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory adherence. This involves first identifying the nature of the request and its potential implications. Then, assess the request against KEPCO internal policies, relevant laws, and ethical guidelines. If the request is legitimate and can be fulfilled ethically and legally, proceed with transparency and proper documentation. If there is any doubt or potential for conflict, seek guidance from legal or compliance departments. The ultimate goal is to ensure that all actions taken are defensible, transparent, and uphold the integrity of KEPCO and its hiring processes. Question 16. Compliance review shows that KEPCO is considering using anonymized historical candidate data from the hiring assessment test to identify trends in assessment performance for internal process improvement. However, the specific anonymization protocol used in the past may not fully meet the current interpretation of the KEPCO hiring assessment test's data privacy guidelines. What is the most appropriate course of action for KEPCO to take? Option A. Proceed with the analysis using the existing anonymized data, assuming the previous anonymization was sufficient for internal process improvement purposes. Option B. Share the anonymized historical data with an external data analytics firm for analysis, trusting their expertise to handle it appropriately. Option C. Implement a robust re-anonymization process for the historical data, ensuring it strictly adheres to the current interpretation of the KEPCO hiring assessment test's data privacy guidelines before any analysis begins. Option D. Obtain explicit, informed consent from all past candidates whose data might be used for this new purpose, even if the data is anonymized. The correct answer is C. Implement a robust re-anonymization process for the historical data, ensuring it strictly adheres to the current interpretation of the KEPCO hiring assessment test's data privacy guidelines before any analysis begins. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing KEPCO operational needs with the stringent regulatory requirements of the KEPCO hiring assessment test framework, specifically concerning data privacy and the ethical handling of candidate information. The core of the challenge lies in ensuring that any data sharing, even for internal process improvement, strictly adheres to the established guidelines, preventing potential breaches or misuse of sensitive personal data. Careful judgment is required to identify and implement solutions that are both effective for KEPCO and compliant with the regulatory framework. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the KEPCO hiring assessment test's specific guidelines on data handling and anonymization. This approach is right because it prioritizes compliance by ensuring that any data used for analysis is de-identified to a degree that prevents the re-identification of individual candidates, thereby safeguarding their privacy as mandated by the regulatory framework. This aligns with the ethical obligation to protect candidate information and avoids any potential violations of the assessment's stipulated data usage policies. An incorrect approach that involves sharing raw, identifiable candidate data with external consultants for analysis would be professionally unacceptable. This fails to adhere to the data privacy principles embedded within the KEPCO hiring assessment test framework, creating a significant risk of data breach and violating the trust placed in KEPCO by the candidates. Another incorrect approach, which is to proceed with analysis without explicit consent for this specific type of data usage, also represents a regulatory and ethical failure. Even if the data is anonymized, the initial collection and subsequent use for purposes beyond the direct assessment process require careful consideration of the assessment's terms and conditions regarding data utilization. Finally, an approach that relies on informal agreements or assumptions about data usage, rather than a formal, documented process aligned with the regulatory framework, is inherently risky and unprofessional, as it lacks the necessary rigor and accountability. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the applicable regulatory framework. This involves proactively identifying all relevant rules, guidelines, and ethical considerations. When faced with a situation like this, the process should involve 1. Identifying the specific regulatory requirements related to data handling and privacy within the KEPCO hiring assessment test framework. 2. Evaluating potential solutions against these requirements, focusing on compliance and ethical implications. 3. Seeking clarification or expert advice if any aspect of the framework is ambiguous. 4. Documenting the chosen approach and the rationale behind it, ensuring transparency and accountability. Question 17. Performance analysis shows that KEPCO recent integration of a new renewable energy source has led to unexpected fluctuations in local air quality readings, potentially exceeding permissible emission levels as defined by South Korean environmental regulations. KEPCO internal review suggests that, while the overall energy output is meeting targets, the specific emissions profile during peak integration periods requires immediate attention. What is the most appropriate course of action for KEPCO to address this situation in strict adherence to the regulatory framework? Option A. Continue operating the new renewable energy source at its current capacity, while initiating an internal investigation to develop potential mitigation strategies, with the intention of implementing them if deemed cost-effective, and if no immediate regulatory action is taken against KEPCO. Option B. Proactively engage with the Ministry of Environment to report the observed air quality fluctuations, request guidance on the specific regulatory requirements for such emissions, and collaborate on a plan for immediate monitoring and mitigation in accordance with the Environmental Impact Assessment Act. Option C. Implement minor adjustments to the operational parameters of the new renewable energy source based on general industry best practices for emission control, without direct consultation with the Ministry of Environment, to reduce the observed fluctuations. Option D. Immediately halt the integration of the new renewable energy source until a comprehensive internal study can be completed to identify and rectify the emission issues, and then submit a revised environmental impact report to the Ministry of Environment. The correct answer is D. Immediately halt the integration of the new renewable energy source until a comprehensive internal study can be completed to identify and rectify the emission issues, and then submit a revised environmental impact report to the Ministry of Environment. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because KEPCO, as a major energy provider, operates within a highly regulated environment where compliance with specific energy sector laws and environmental protection guidelines is paramount. The pressure to meet performance targets, especially in the context of renewable energy integration, can create a temptation to overlook or downplay potential environmental impacts. Careful judgment is required to balance operational efficiency with legal obligations and ethical responsibilities towards environmental stewardship. The correct approach involves a proactive and transparent engagement with the relevant regulatory bodies, specifically the Ministry of Environment in South Korea, to ensure full compliance with the Environmental Impact Assessment Act. This approach prioritizes adherence to legal frameworks and demonstrates a commitment to responsible corporate citizenship. By seeking official guidance and approvals, KEPCO mitigates legal risks, avoids potential penalties, and builds trust with stakeholders. This aligns with the principles of good governance and sustainable business practices mandated by South Korean law. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on internal cost-benefit analysis without consulting regulatory authorities fails to acknowledge the legal requirement for environmental impact assessments. This bypasses critical due diligence and exposes KEPCO to significant legal repercussions, including fines and operational disruptions, under the Environmental Impact Assessment Act. Another incorrect approach, which involves implementing mitigation measures only after a problem is identified, is reactive rather than preventative. This contravenes the spirit of the Environmental Impact Assessment Act, which mandates assessment and mitigation planning before project commencement. It also risks significant reputational damage and potential legal challenges from environmental groups or affected communities. A third incorrect approach, which relies on industry best practices without verifying their alignment with specific South Korean regulations, is insufficient. While industry standards can be informative, they do not supersede legal requirements. Failure to adhere to the specific stipulations of the Environmental Impact Assessment Act, regardless of general industry norms, constitutes a regulatory failure. Professionals in such situations should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all applicable legal and regulatory requirements. This is followed by a thorough assessment of potential impacts, consultation with relevant authorities, and the development of a compliance plan. Transparency and a commitment to ethical conduct should guide all decisions, ensuring that operational goals do not compromise legal obligations or environmental integrity. Question 18. Stakeholder feedback indicates that a recent operational change implemented by KEPCO to improve efficiency in its power generation facilities may be inadvertently impacting local environmental quality, a concern that falls under the purview of Korean environmental protection laws and energy sector regulations. What is the most appropriate initial course of action for KEPCO management to address this feedback? Option A. Initiate a comprehensive internal review of the operational change, involving relevant technical, environmental, and legal departments, to assess its actual impact against KEPCO environmental permits and Korean environmental regulations, and to gather data for a transparent response to stakeholders. Option B. Delegate the responsibility of addressing the feedback to the department that implemented the operational change, assuming they have already ensured full compliance. Option C. Publicly state that KEPCO operations are fully compliant with all regulations and that the feedback is likely based on misinformation, without conducting an internal investigation. Option D. Immediately revert the operational change to appease stakeholders and avoid potential regulatory scrutiny. The correct answer is D. Immediately revert the operational change to appease stakeholders and avoid potential regulatory scrutiny. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because KEPCO, as a major energy provider, operates within a highly regulated environment where public trust and adherence to established protocols are paramount. The feedback highlights a potential disconnect between operational efficiency and stakeholder expectations, requiring a nuanced approach that balances business needs with regulatory compliance and ethical considerations. The core of the challenge lies in interpreting and responding to feedback that could have implications for safety, environmental impact, or customer service, all of which are subject to strict oversight. The correct approach involves a systematic and transparent review process that prioritizes regulatory compliance and stakeholder engagement. This means acknowledging the feedback, initiating an internal investigation that adheres to KEPCO established procedures and relevant Korean energy regulations, and then communicating findings and proposed actions back to stakeholders. This approach is correct because it demonstrates accountability, respects the regulatory framework governing KEPCO operations, and fosters trust by actively addressing concerns. It aligns with principles of good corporate governance and responsible business conduct, ensuring that any operational changes are vetted against legal and ethical standards. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the feedback without thorough investigation, citing operational pressures or perceived lack of validity. This would be professionally unacceptable, as it disregards potential risks and fails to uphold KEPCO duty to operate responsibly and in accordance with Korean energy laws and regulations. Another incorrect approach would be to implement changes based solely on the feedback without consulting relevant regulatory bodies or conducting a comprehensive impact assessment. This could lead to non-compliance, unintended consequences, and reputational damage. A third incorrect approach would be to provide a superficial response that does not address the root cause of the stakeholder concerns, thereby failing to build trust and potentially exacerbating the issue. Professionals in such situations should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the nature and source of the feedback. This involves identifying the specific regulatory requirements that might be implicated. Next, they should initiate a fact-finding process, gathering data and evidence to assess the validity of the feedback. This process must be guided by KEPCO internal policies and relevant Korean laws. Based on the findings, a determination should be made on the appropriate course of action, which may involve internal process adjustments, further investigation, or consultation with regulatory authorities. Transparency and clear communication with stakeholders throughout this process are crucial for maintaining trust and ensuring compliance. Question 19. Process analysis reveals that during a recent tender for essential components for KEPCO new renewable energy project, one supplier submitted a bid significantly lower than all others. While this presents a potential cost-saving opportunity, concerns have been raised internally about the supplier's capacity to deliver high-quality components at such a price. A senior manager, eager to meet project budget targets, has suggested prioritizing this bid due to its cost advantage, even if it means expediting the evaluation process and potentially overlooking some minor discrepancies in the technical specifications. What is the most appropriate course of action for KEPCO personnel involved in this procurement? Option A. Engage in informal discussions with the lowest bidder to pressure them into slightly increasing their bid to align more closely with other offers, thereby creating a more competitive range. Option B. Accept the lowest bid immediately to secure the cost savings, assuming the supplier will meet the requirements, and address any potential quality issues that may arise during the delivery phase. Option C. Conduct a thorough and documented evaluation of all bids, rigorously assessing the lowest bidder's technical proposal, financial stability, and capacity to meet quality standards, and clearly justify any decision to accept or reject the bid based on objective criteria and regulatory compliance. Option D. Reject the lowest bid outright due to concerns about its viability, without conducting a detailed technical and capacity assessment, to avoid potential future problems. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough and documented evaluation of all bids, rigorously assessing the lowest bidder's technical proposal, financial stability, and capacity to meet quality standards, and clearly justify any decision to accept or reject the bid based on objective criteria and regulatory compliance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for KEPCO employees involved in the procurement process due to the inherent conflict between seeking the most cost-effective solutions and adhering to strict ethical guidelines and regulatory frameworks governing public procurement. The pressure to reduce project costs can create an environment where shortcuts or ethically questionable practices might seem appealing, but such actions carry significant risks of regulatory noncompliance, reputational damage, and legal repercussions. Careful judgment is required to balance financial objectives with the imperative of maintaining integrity and fairness. The correct approach involves a transparent and documented process of evaluating all bids against predefined, objective criteria, ensuring that any deviation from the lowest bid is justifiable based on factors explicitly permitted by KEPCO procurement policies and relevant South Korean regulations. This approach upholds the principles of fair competition, accountability, and value for money, which are cornerstones of public sector procurement. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of the Act on Contracts to which the state is a party, and the Enforcement Decree of the Act on Contracts to which the state is a party, which mandate transparency, fairness, and efficiency in government contracting. By prioritizing a thorough evaluation and clear justification for any decision, KEPCO employees demonstrate their commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. An incorrect approach that involves accepting a bid based on a personal relationship or informal assurance of future benefits, without proper documentation or adherence to established evaluation procedures, represents a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This practice undermines the integrity of the procurement process, potentially leading to favoritisly awarded contracts and a loss of public trust, violates principles of impartiality and fairness, and could be construed as a form of corruption or bribery under South Korean law, such as the Improper Solicitation and Graft Act. Another incorrect approach, which is to disregard a bid that appears significantly lower than others without a proper investigation into its viability, also poses a risk. While due diligence is necessary, arbitrarily dismissing a potentially cost-saving bid without a documented and objective reason can lead to inefficient resource allocation and may be seen as a failure to achieve best value for KEPCO, potentially contravening the spirit of competitive bidding and cost-effectiveness mandated by procurement regulations. A third incorrect approach, which is to pressure a supplier to lower their bid after the submission deadline, is also problematic. Procurement regulations typically stipulate that bids are to be evaluated as submitted. Post-submission negotiations, unless explicitly permitted by the tender documents and regulations for specific circumstances, can compromise the fairness of the process and create an uneven playing field for other bidders. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a systematic adherence to KEPCO-established procurement policies and relevant South Korean laws. This includes clearly defining evaluation criteria before bid submission, ensuring all evaluators are trained and impartial, meticulously documenting all evaluation steps and decisions, and seeking guidance from legal or compliance departments when faced with ambiguity or potential conflicts of interest. The focus should always be on achieving the best outcome for KEPCO through a fair, transparent, and compliant process. Question 20. Governance review demonstrates that KEPCO's recent pilot program for a new grid management system has encountered delays due to unforeseen integration challenges with existing infrastructure. The project team is eager to accelerate deployment to realize anticipated efficiency gains, but concerns have been raised regarding the system's full compliance with South Korean energy sector regulations, particularly concerning data security and operational resilience. Which of the following approaches best addresses this situation while upholding KEPCO commitment to regulatory adherence and operational integrity? Option A. Expedite the full deployment of the new grid management system across all KEPCO operations immediately, assuming that the pilot program's partial success indicates sufficient compliance, and address any regulatory issues that may arise post-implementation. Option B. Halt the integration of the new grid management system entirely until a comprehensive overhaul of all existing infrastructure can be completed to ensure absolute compatibility and compliance, even if this significantly delays modernization efforts. Option C. Proceed with the full deployment of the new grid management system, but instruct the IT department to implement ad hoc security patches and operational workarounds as needed to address potential regulatory gaps identified during the pilot phase. Option D. Implement a phased rollout of the new grid management system, beginning with a limited scope and conducting rigorous testing and validation against all relevant South Korean energy regulations, including data privacy and cybersecurity standards, before expanding its use. The correct answer is D. Implement a phased rollout of the new grid management system, beginning with a limited scope and conducting rigorous testing and validation against all relevant South Korean energy regulations, including data privacy and cybersecurity standards, before expanding its use. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between immediate operational needs and long-term regulatory compliance, particularly within the context of KEPCO operations, which are subject to stringent energy sector regulations. The need to quickly integrate new technology while ensuring it meets all established safety, environmental, and operational standards requires a delicate balancing act. A failure to adequately address these requirements could lead to significant financial penalties, operational disruptions, reputational damage, and potential harm to the public or environment. Careful judgment is required to prioritize compliance without unduly hindering innovation and efficiency gains. The correct approach involves a phased integration strategy that prioritizes thorough risk assessment and compliance verification before full deployment. This means establishing clear testing protocols, obtaining necessary certifications, and ensuring all documentation is in order according to KEPCO internal policies and relevant South Korean energy regulations. This approach is professionally sound because it directly addresses the governance review's findings by systematically mitigating potential risks. It aligns with the principles of due diligence and responsible corporate conduct, ensuring that KEPCO operates within legal and ethical boundaries. Specifically, adherence to the Electricity Business Act and related environmental regulations would be paramount, demanding that new technologies are proven safe and environmentally sound before widespread adoption. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with immediate, widespread deployment of the new technology without adequate testing or verification. This bypasses critical regulatory checkpoints and exposes KEPCO to significant noncompliance risks. Such an action would violate the spirit and letter of regulatory frameworks designed to protect public interest and ensure stable energy supply. Another incorrect approach would be to delay the integration indefinitely due to minor, easily rectifiable compliance issues. While caution is necessary, an overly conservative stance that stifles necessary technological advancement without a clear, proportionate risk-based justification could also be seen as a failure in operational management and potentially contravene directives encouraging modernization within the energy sector. A third incorrect approach might involve seeking to circumvent or reinterpret regulations to expedite deployment, which is ethically and legally indefensible and would likely result in severe repercussions. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the governance review's findings and the specific regulatory landscape. This involves identifying all applicable laws, regulations, and internal policies. The next step is to conduct a thorough risk assessment for each proposed integration strategy, evaluating potential impacts on safety, environment, operations, and compliance. Based on this assessment, a phased approach that incorporates robust testing, validation, and certification should be developed. Continuous engagement with relevant regulatory bodies and internal compliance departments is crucial throughout the process to ensure alignment and address any emerging concerns proactively.